are President Obama's post-Labor Day moves to boost jobs going to work?
Well, joining us now from Washington, Dan Clifton, the head of policy research at Strategas Research Partners. Dan was formerly chief economist for Americans for Tax Reform and executive director of the American Shareholders Association. And with us here in the studio, Dan Gerstein, a Democratic consultant and strategist. He served as Senator Joe Lieberman's communications director and helped run his 2004 presidential campaign and his 2006 Senate campaign. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And Dan Gerstein, you're here with us, so let's start with you. Proposals that we've been hearing from the White House, namely the president saying that he wants to try to spur the economy through infrastructure jobs, $50 billion. Is this a question of a little too little and too late?
Absolutely, and I think these are both good ideas, but they should have been proposed last year.
Why
ideally,
weren't
in the course. That's a very good question. I think that there was a bias towards Democratic interest group favored proposals that went into the stimulus bill. Again, a consequence of President Obama making the critical strategic error of letting Nancy Pelosi write the stimulus bill. It's coming back to haunt him on multiple occasions. And here are two good ideas that could have gotten bipartisan support if they were the basis of an original stimulus bill. Now they're getting thrown in at the very end when voters have already sort of made up their minds. And I think they will have very little impact, unfortunately.
And Dan Clifton, what about the reaction here from the investing community? I mean, Dan G seems to say, you know, this is sort of a no-brainer, but is it coming from the business perspective?
Well, that's right. You have the business community, you have the investor community. The businesses are looking at this and saying, as standalone measures, these are very good. Yes, it should have been done 6 months ago, but let's do it right now, particularly expensing of capital equipment. It's a great idea, something that's been pushed for a long time. But if we're going to pay for it with taxes on U.S. multinational foreign source profits, I think it becomes a lot more controversial and a lot harder to get done before the election. Politically, though, I think what President Obama is trying to do is move this away from a referendum on the Democrats and try and get it to a choice and try and say that he's for the middle class. Republicans are defending the wealthy and the companies that are outsourcing. I do believe it's too little too late, but it does make an interesting turn for the next 57 days.
Well, too little too late. I mean, is it going to make any difference here that he's sort of trying to change the narrative at this point?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, a lot of the data that we're looking at, Julie, shows significant losses for the Democrats in the midterm election. The generic ballot's pointing to 70, 80 seat loss right now. And so what they're trying to do is maybe win some seats back. Pennsylvania's going, Ohio's going, and a lot of those states is where these provisions would be critical. So they're just trying to minimize the losses.
Well, I would go a step further and say, you know, Team Obama has had a record, particularly in the 2008 campaign, of taking the long view. They were constantly trying to think about what's going to happen several steps down the line. In this case, I think this is less about 2010 and more about 2011. I really do think that this is going to have minimal impact on this specific campaign. These measures are not going to pass. Republicans will block them. They're not going to change voters' minds. But what they can do is position the president after this election he's already got ideas on the table that have bipartisan support. They could form the basis of a new economic stimulus that could get a block of moderate Republican support.
Is this something where are we seeing a replay of 1994 when the Republicans came into power? And a lot of people, a lot of historians say that President Clinton was pushed towards the center when Newt Gingrich and the new Republicans came in and took over the House.
Well, I hate to go use those parallels because they're not exact. But yes, I think to a large degree that President Obama's going to have no choice. If he wants to move any legislation, if he wants to do anything to focus on the economy, starting after this election, the Republicans are going to make huge gains. Whether they get the majority or not is actually kind of moot.
Are they,
because they're going to have veto authority on anything President Obama wants to do.
Do you believe that the White House has resigned itself to the fact that Republicans will probably take over one or both chambers of Congress?
Not that the Republicans will definitely take over, but again, that they're going to have an effective majority, whether they like it or not, whether they have a nominal majority, because they can block anything the president wants to do. There will not be any health care or any other bills that they can push through with Democratic-only votes starting next year.
Dan Clifton, what is all of this going to mean for the Bush tax cuts? I mean, you saw Peter Orszag weigh in on this today and say extend them for another 2 years. You think that idea is going to get any traction?
Well, it's interesting because over the last week, we've been picking up a number of Democrats in the Senate outside the traditional Ben Nelsons who are starting to support an extension of all the Bush tax cuts. You saw it again with Obama's former OMB director, Peter Orszag. But Pelosi, Reid, and Obama are adamant about not extending those tax cuts. So this was one way to shift some of the discussion away from tax increases going up. I think ultimately we're going to have a 20% capital gains and dividend tax rate, and the upper income tax brackets are going to be extended for one more year, and that's a reality that the administration needs to catch up with. But it might be better because then that sets up tax reform in 2011 to what Dan is saying that this is going to carry over into next year.
And Dan, we'll let you get the last 20 seconds here. The tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, extended or not?
Well, I tend to agree with the other Dan that as much as the president and the leadership in Congress want to repeal the upper income Bush tax cuts, they don't have the votes. And they've failed. They failed in their fundamental mission of persuading the moderate Democrats to hold the line. Going into this bad electoral climate, they're not going to want to vote for tax increases.
All right, Dan Gerstein, Dan Clifton joining us talking about the economy and the election season, which is now in full swing. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Appreciate it.